Test. Our city attorney is our parliamentarian.
We're having a little bit of a mic problem. Can y'all hear me now? Yes. So as the temporary parliamentarian, I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. until we elect a chair. And Vicki, I guess the next item of business is the public comment section.
Okay. For public comment, I've received one request to address the commission regarding agenda item number 8. Person wishing to speak is Cynthia Ferris, address 106 Gaines Court, Fate.
Good evening. I'm Cynthia Ferris, 106 Gaines Court. First, thank you to everyone who volunteered to serve on the committee. It's much appreciated. As I looked over the documents in preparation and reflected somewhat on agenda item 8, I have some concerns that some of the recommendations may not be in the best interest of our community, specifically those concerning section 3.05 and Article 5. Let's begin with the council's role in investigating city departments. While it may seem unnecessary or outdated, even the best-run organizations need checks and balances. I'm sure many people remember the 2019 college admissions scandal, where coaches and other officials were bribed to secure spots at prestigious universities like USC, UCLA, Harvard, Stanford, and even UT Austin, institutions that most would consider professional and well-run. Removing the council's investigative power would limit the city's ability to protect the public interest. While investigations do require time and resources, the benefits are worth the effort. Turning to Article 5, tools like initiatives, referendums, and recalls empower citizens to directly shape their government. These tools are a key part of what makes our system distinctive. While there is not an exact recommendation in the supporting document, the general inference is that restrictions are needed due to misinformation and special interest groups. While concerns about misinformation, especially on social media, are valid, it's important to distinguish misinformation from opinions that merely differ from our own. The city has already shown its ability to engage and address residents effectively, as demonstrated with the recent bond process. By continuing to invest in social media campaigns, civic education, and fact-based communications, the city can counter misinformation without making citizen participation more difficult. This committee's work is vital in shaping our city and can have a direct impact on ensuring our community remains where trust and accountability thrive. Again, thank you for your time and service to the city.
Okay, I have no other requests to address the commission. So the next item will be item number 3, open government training by the city attorney.
Okay.
You kind of have to speak like really into it for it to work. And the button should be all the way up.
Okay. This feels very strange, but if y'all can't hear me, let me know. I'm Jennifer Ritchie. I'm the city attorney for the city of Fate, and so we wanted to do some open government training. I have several slides. I'm going to skip through some of them, ones that I don't think necessarily apply to the Charter Review Commission, but you can have those slides as a resource, even if I skip them. So we're going to briefly cover state law requirements, the Texas Open Meetings Act, the Texas Public Information Act, and then we have some local rules that also impact these two things. So I'm going to refer throughout this presentation on the Texas Open Meetings Act as TOMA. So when I say TOMA, that I'm referring to the Open Meetings Act. This was adopted by the state of Texas in 1967, and it's been revised really almost every legislative session since then. TOMA is mandatory for every governmental body except the Texas legislature, which is kind of ironic. And it provides the public has a statutory right to observe its government in action, so a right to observe the deliberation and votes of city officials, and the right to speak before action on the matter is taken. As a member of the boards, you should have watched an open meetings video and filled out a certificate of completion. Many of y'all are in other boards, and if you haven't done that, Vicki can coordinate that with you.
Can send that out to those that have not yet.
So all meetings have to be open to the public. There is executive session, and so if y'all have watched council meetings, cities will go into executive session. And again, I have those slides in there, but I'm going to skip over them because it's unlikely that we will go into executive session. It also provides that your meeting agendas have to be posted 72 hours in advance, with some exceptions, on a city bulletin board and the internet. And these postings have to give the public sufficient notice of what is being discussed, so they can't be too vague. But sometimes if they're too specific, it puts people like Michael and I in the quandary of having to tell boards or councils, you're outside the posting, you need to quit talking about that. So we will endeavor to make your postings, and when y'all have a chair, they will assist us in making your postings broad enough so that y'all can talk about the charter. There's two definitions of meetings in the Open Meetings Act, and it's a deliberation between a quorum of the governmental body or a quorum and another person. And this can be either for a meeting in which the government body participates or which you're responsible. And then there's a second definition of meeting, and I want to point out that meeting does not include a gathering and a social function. And especially this time of year with holiday parties, y'all may find yourself a quorum at a holiday party, for instance, and that's fine as long as you do not talk about official city business. And the city business for this board is the Charter Review Commission. And this exception for social gatherings and also for other kinds of meetings applies if no formal action is not taken and any discussion of public business is incidental to the event. So what does this apply to? I mentioned earlier it applies to the city council. It applies to a deliberative body with rulemaking or quasi-judicial power. And then it also applies, by state law, it applies to boards and commissions whose recommendations are usually approved by the city council. And so many cities, including Fate, have made the decision, and I think this is a good decision, to say that even if you're an advisory board, the Open Meetings Act applies to you, because we don't want to be in a situation where the city council doesn't feel like they can adopt recommendations of the board because you aren't subject to open meetings. So this body, Vicki included in your board packet the charge of the council, and you'll see in that charge it says that the Charter Commission is subject to the Open Meetings Act. So again, it applies when a quorum of the members is present, and for y'all, that's 5. And so if you have 5, you cannot discuss public business outside the public meeting, and again, the business for you is the charter. You need to be careful with emails and other media in which you may accidentally create a quorum. So you'll notice that when staff sends you an email, we will very often blind copy the whole board because we don't want anybody to accidentally do a reply all and create a quorum problem. And so you will get emails and you will think, gosh, did this go to the whole board? If Vicki's saying Charter Review Commission, it went to the whole board. She's just blind copying to make sure we don't accidentally do reply alls. Again, be careful about discussing the Charter Review Commission outside of a posted meeting. And I'll go into this in more detail, a quorum can be established by a series of communications. This is what's called a walking quorum. So if any of y'all have been to conferences like TML, they'll talk about walking quorums, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute. So it also prevents you from discussing your meetings items that are not posted on the agenda. So for instance, and I'm just going to give a crazy example, but let's say there's some kind of police issue in Fate before the next meeting. Well, that's probably not going to be on your agenda because it's not a charter review thing, and so you can't sit here in the meeting and talk about a police issue. As a quorum of you couldn't, because it wouldn't be posted on your agenda. But that also means that if there's something you want to discuss and it relates to your charge, the Charter Review Commission, let your chairperson that you're about to elect know and Vicki know, and we can make sure it's properly posted so you can discuss it. So I mentioned walking quorum. This is the concept of basically the laws trying to prevent people from circumventing the Open Meetings Act. And so let me tell you the case that all of us are taught TML, Texas Municipal League teaches this case. It's an actual case, and this is a case that happened under the old law, and this happened in the city of San Antonio. And the night before the city of San Antonio's council was going to consider some funding for a nonprofit group, there were a series of meetings between less than a quorum and the city manager to discuss the grant decision. And the next day, the vote was just, we vote to approve, I'm making up a number, $10,000. And there ended up being a lawsuit about that. And it was found that it was a violation of the Open Meetings Act. That law, the old provision, has been found to be unconstitutional. Some of us feel like the current law is actually more strict than the old law. And so I put that on there, which is, it says, and I've summarized, that elected or appointed officials can't communicate with other members of a governing body to persuade them on an issue if they communicate individually with a quorum or know that others will do such a communication. And so let me give you an example. If one of you, and I'm just going to use some names, and I'm just picking names because I can see the name tag. So this is, if Callie talks to Karen and talks about a charter review commission outside the meeting, knowing that Karen's going to talk to John and Cody and John Thatcher and create a quorum, that could be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So again, probably the safer course of action is to not talk about the charter review commission outside of your meetings. New technologies can raise novel issues. Social media in particular, you can accidentally violate the Open Meetings Act. An example of that is official posting on Facebook about city business, and a quorum participates in that discussion, can create an open meetings violation. So again, I'm gonna start some of the slides that I'll skip because, just watch, I skip one and this will happen. But these are what happens if you have an emergency like a tornado. And so I'm gonna skip through some of these. Again, they're available for y'all. These slides are available for you for your reference. And I'm gonna skip the executive session, but I do wanna talk about the criminal penalties. So there's several violations of Open Meetings Act, and you can see the possible penalties here, and also civil remedies. So an action in violation of TOMA is voidable, meaning that if somebody sued, they could undo the work of this very important commission. And so then I'm going to talk about the public right to speak. Again, this is open meetings, and that's what you just saw in front of you, which is the public gets to speak about an agenda item before or during the consideration of the item. And so at y'all's future charter commission meetings, we will have this period where public speakers can come talk to you about the Charter Review Commission. The law provides that council can establish reasonable rules. Council's already done that for all the boards. And those rules can't prohibit public criticism, including criticism of the act. So if somebody comes up and criticizes what you're doing, you just sit there and take it. So I'm going to stop right there and see if anybody has questions about the Open Meetings Act before I go on to the Public Information Act. And I know I talk fast, so I apologize. But again, and I'm always willing to answer questions outside the meeting too. So let me turn to the Public Information Act, because I know y'all want to get to what you're here for, to just talk about the charter. And this is going to be much quicker. So the Public Information Act allows the public to get information from the city. So, the AG is required to liberally construe this act. And so for the most part, if somebody makes an open records request, and that's regarding any written materials, for the most part, if the city wants to withhold the information, we have to get permission from the Attorney General. And so, and most things are public. Now, there are exceptions, like if somebody asked for your social security numbers, we would seek to protect those, and the AG would protect those. So what is public? Ordinances and resolutions, policies, memorandum, emails, texts, social media posts. So the city archives its own social media post, and so that could be subject to open records. And of course, there are exceptions. So if Michael and I are emailing about some litigation, that's subject to an exception to the Public Information Act. And it's information that is owned by the city. The city has a right to access or spend city funds to write. And the state law a couple sessions ago tried to close a loophole, and it makes you as as Charter Commission members, temporary custodians. So even if you use your private phone, which all of y'all don't have city phones, but if you use your private phone or your private computer for city business, those messages or emails could be subject, and it makes you a custodian of that information. And again, here's the liability for the Texas Public Information Act. And so here are some other helpful resources, and of course, I'm always willing to answer those questions, and feel free to call me if you have those. And if you'll have any questions right now, I'm happy to answer those. Thank y'all.
Okay, the next item will be agenda item 4, legal briefing on the charter and charter purpose by the city attorney.
Okay, and let me get out of this. So, and hopefully this will be the last y'all hear of me talking tonight. I feel like I'm like a monologue up here, but I wanted to briefly go over what the Charter Review Commission is for. And some of y'all, when y'all were interviewed at the council meeting, heard me talk about this. So a home rule charter, and by the way, Fate is a home rule city. We're not a general law city. What that means is a home rule city can pass any law regarding health, safety, and welfare. And unless the state prohibits us from doing it, or there's a national law that prohibits us from doing it, a city can do that. That's different from a general law city that can only do what the state gives them power to do. And so a home rule charter for Fate, it's like a constitution for the state or the federal government. It cannot contain any provision inconsistent with state law or federal law. Our current charter says that it should be reviewed every 5 years, which is why council has instituted this Charter Review Commission, but it can't be considered by voters sooner than every 2 years, and that's in our own charter and the Texas Constitution. So, and the reason I'm telling y'all that is what y'all do today is so important, and so we're so grateful for y'all serving as the Charter Review Commission. But whatever you put in the charter, if it goes to the election of the voters and it passes, that is what's in the charter for the next 2 years, because no matter what we do, we can't put it back in front of the voters for 2 years. So it's very, very important. And so for this reason that once you put it in and it gets, if the voters approve it and it gets put in the charter and it's there for 2 years, no matter what you do, then it should contain big picture items, just like a constitution does, not get into the weeds and things that are difficult to change. And so it shouldn't cover every problem in the city, but just the big picture items. And again, this is just a very important job, and so staff and I know the council are very grateful for the service, because it looks like we have a meeting every week except maybe one until we're finished with the work of this commission. So your job is to recommend changes to the council, and they gave you parameters. The council gave you parameters in your charge, and that charge is in your notebook. And in order to ensure placement, and this is also in your charge, council really wants, if y'all recommend any changes to the charter, council wants to place this on the May 3rd, 2025 ballot. And so in order to get that on the ballot, the report of the recommended amendments should be submitted to the city council for their consideration by January 27th, 2025. And so this is a very tight schedule. I'll just say that when I mentioned to my law firm how tight of a schedule was, they kind of laughed. And so the council at January 27th, 2025 meeting will consider your recommendations. They'll decide whether to call an election and which provisions to place before the voters. So because we're on a really tight timeline, attendance is really, if we don't have at least 5 members here, we can't have the meeting. And you're about to discuss your procedures, and so I would urge you to think about how much we have to accomplish and what a short a period of time we have to accomplish it. I would suggest that part of these procedures perhaps be deadlines for getting to staff proposed changes so that we can properly research them. And Vicki has in your notebook a schedule and proposed kind of homework deadlines. And those are those proposed deadlines. I mean, again, these are your procedures, but proposed deadlines where if y'all have something you want to be in the charter, it needs to get to staff so that we can properly research it. Because what I would hate to do is y'all spend 30 minutes discussing something, and then I come to the very next meeting and say, everything you just spent 30 minutes doing, you can't. I'd rather have researched it ahead of time. I would also suggest that you consider voting on items as you go and not revisit them at subsequent meetings. But again, these are your procedures, and I'm just making suggestions. And finally, at the last meeting, after you've all come to a consensus on what your recommendations are, I'm going to ask that you give me authority to make changes based on a final legal review before I present it to council. And so what that helps us do is, I mean, hopefully I will have caught all the issues as we go, but that will give me the ability that if I catch something after the Charter Review Commission finishes, that we can make those changes before we present them to council. So I'm happy to take any questions about that. Okay, Vicki?
Okay.
Jennifer, I do have I want to make sure I'm understanding you, that after tonight, we should submit individually amendments that we would propose to the charter prior to the meeting. I was thinking that would happen in the course of the meeting, but you're saying send them to you so that you can flesh out if it complies with Texas law.
Well, again, staff follows y'all's procedures. So after you elect your chair and vice chair, y'all will discuss what your procedures are. But what we're suggesting is, and Vicki, I think, has this sheet in your packets. And so what we're suggesting is, and I'll give you a for instance, so at your next meeting, which would be January 9th at 6 p.m., y'all are going to be talking about Articles 1 through 4. That's what staff's suggesting. But again, y'all are coming up with this timeline. And so what I'm suggesting maybe you should consider as part of your procedures is that if you have a proposed change to the charter, that doesn't, I want to, I've heard at their interviews like resign to run. I want to change the resign to run provision. And maybe you don't even know what that change is, but maybe you know, maybe you do. I mean, that you send the email to me and Vicki and Michael, and that way, not to each other. Remember, you can't copy each other, but that way I'll know that, oh my gosh, I need to really be beefed up on the resign to run provision. So I'm not suggesting that you know exactly what you want to be changed, but that way, I mean, many of y'all said at the interview how long the charter was, and so I just want to make sure that I'm focusing on those things that are probably going to come up and ignoring those things that won't.
But then we'll still be able to discuss them once you have the proposed changes in, right, at the next meetings.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so it's not like we're going to all sit here and read this one by one necessarily and talk about it, but each line item. But we can talk about when they present it. Let's say, like for John, I know John said he wanted the resign to run thing. We know we're going to talk about resign to run when we do that, and then we can debate it and deliberate then. So it's just a way to kind of streamline it, because we're in a real tight deadline to do this, right? So.
Thank you for your question.
Are you ready to move on? Okay. Next is item 5, discuss, consider, and take any necessary action regarding electing a chairman and a vice chairman.
I want to nominate Cody Chin to be our chairperson.
And I'll nominate Karen Kaiser to be our chairperson.
Are there any other nominations for chairman?
I wanted to nominate John Stacy to be our chair.
So I've
Anyone on
received-
that side of the room?
I'm sorry.
I say we're all right here.
Yes. So I've received a nomination for Cody Chin, Karen Kaiser, and John Stacy for chairman. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we will vote on the nominations in alphabetical order. So basically in the order they were made, oddly enough. So all those in favor, you get one vote only. All those in favor of Cody Chin, please raise your right hand. Okay, I see 3. All those in favor of Karen Kaiser, please raise your right hand. 2. And all those in favor of John Stacy, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we did not receive a majority vote. It would take 5 to have a majority. So we will have to do a second round of voting. Got it? Okay. So all those in favor of Cody Chen, raise your right hand. 3. All those in favor of Karen Kaiser, raise your right hand. None. And all those in favor of John Stacy, raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. John Stacy secures the nomination for chairman. And then, Mr. Stacy, would you like me to continue with this item, or did you want to take over?
I can take over.
Okay, great.
All right, so we're going to now take nominations for vice chair. Do I hear any?
I'll nominate Karen Kaiser.
I'll nominate Cody Chen.
I'd like to nominate Autumn Levinsky.
Are there any others? So can you read them off in alphabetical order again?
Yes. Cody Chen, so in alphabetical order, it would go Cody Chen, Autumn Levinsky, and Karen Kaiser. I'm sorry, Karen will go before Autumn. Sorry. Yes. So Cody Chen, then it will be Karen Kaiser, and then Autumn Levinsky.
All right, so who is in favor of Cody Chen being the vice chair?
4.
That's 4. And who did you say was next? I'm sorry, that would be
That's
Karen
fine.
Kaiser.
Karen
So
Kaiser.
those in favor of Karen Kaiser?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And then we have Autumn. And it takes 5.
Yes.
So we will do this again. So now for Cody Chen.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And now for Karen Kaiser.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And that's the whole board.
Yep.
So Karen Kaiser is the vice chair. Yeah, don't miss a meeting. All right, so that takes us to item number 6, discuss, consider, and take any necessary action determining the rules of procedure for the Charter Commission. Was there some of these in our charge, or like, isn't there rules on how we're supposed to operate anyway? Like, we're not going to adopt Robert's Rules of Order or anything. That's not what we're supposed to be doing, or are we?
No, and there are general rules about how boards operate. So really, we're not talking about that. We're more talking about the suggested timeline.
Okay.
And my suggestion about homework, and Vicki, do you disagree with that at all?
No, not at all.
So really, that's what we're talking about, is just how your specific Charter Review Commission rules.
And then I have one question before we get into that. Is there any rule or board procedure about constantly bringing the same thing up? Meaning that every single time we meet, if someone says, you know, like me, like if I want to resign to run, is there any rules that fate has adopted so that once that's defeated once, I can't just keep bringing it up?
So we do follow Robert's Rules of Order for
Okay,
all of
so
our
I
boards or
can-
commissions.
So I can call them out of order if we just keep hearing the same thing over and over again?
Correct, unless,
Okay.
and correct me if I'm wrong, parliamentarian, but, so it's my understanding that if you've voted on resign to run already, and that's already been put to bed, voted upon, whatever, it would take a majority of the board, someone to ask
Yes.
to revisit that, and then second it, and then,
Okay.
but that's kind of what Jennifer was talking about.
I was just making sure because these boards can tend to get passionate about
Yes.
different aspects of the charter. Okay.
The last Charter Review Commission only adopted basically two rules, and it was like respectful interaction amongst one another as board members, and then also majority vote rules.
Okay.
That's it, just historically speaking.
So for those that haven't served on the charter review, I'm gonna do a layman's explanation of what the attorney was saying. Is we have ideas, but the state constitution trumps all of our ideas, and so the goal isn't to stifle a conversation or concepts. It is that if you have something you want to do, sometimes it's just shut down because the state constitution says you can't do it. So instead of always putting the attorney on the spot for her have to read the Constitution and look it up, if you know you have ideas, you can do that. But that's why we're meeting several times. So if something comes up in conversation, we'll just move it to the next meeting if we need to. But it'll really help move things along. The last time I felt like we would meet, and then the attorney would go do homework and then come back, and then we would relitigate the entire meeting, and then we would move to the next section. I think this will really speed things along. So I like the schedule. I don't know if anyone has any issues with the proposed schedule. All right, hearing none, I guess we can take a motion if we want to adopt it.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the rules as discussed.
Do I have a second?
A second.
All right. Do we have to hand vote?
Correct, yes, sir, you will hand vote.
We don't get the cool technology.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously. That brings us to item number 7, discuss, consider, and take any necessary action regarding the schedule of meetings with charter sections to be reviewed at each meeting. I think we just did that.
We did, just for the folks at home, I guess, we can read aloud that the schedule will be, the next meeting is January 9th at 6 p.m., followed by January 13th at 6 p.m., and then the last meeting will be January 21st at 6 p.m. Deadline submissions for homework, December 31st and January 6th.
All right. So that moves us to item number 8. Discuss, consider, and take any necessary action regarding the city manager's recommendation for changes to the city's charter to recommend to the city council. Hopefully everyone got the email. So, Mr. City Manager, would you like to defend yourself, or do you want us just to decide what we want to do here?
No, I figured, so we've done it a couple, and John, you've been on both Johns been on the Charter Commission. So we've done it we've gone through section by section, so I just keep notes and then make suggestions as things come up. But I wanted to, and then we've done kind of the same we've done it kind of like we've done before, so we've sent a memo in advance. But I just wanted to kind of start the conversation. I know we had some, big storm. We had some talk in the nomination process, so we've got a bunch of good ideas already going. And this is just kind of going through the charter. This is kind of what I would do, but it's all up to y'all. If y'all want to consider these, we can do them later during those sections, so you have a chance to think about them and the attorney do more research, or we can talk about them now. Doesn't matter to me.
Does anyone have anything that they would like to discuss from it? Because I would rather take them in the flow, if that's okay. But, one of these I wrote, and you don't like it, and that makes me... No, it is true, but...
Which one was that? I forget.
Huh?
I forget which one was it?
It's the 3.03 and the 3.05. Lance was there. And now I'm chair, so we're not going to hear those. No, I'm totally kidding.
I'd just like to express view on those two subjects in particular. I think city council, I would deny both of those, just because I think it lessens transparency. And if city council has to vote on approving their own on travel expenses by other council members, that's good for public to know what's happening versus an administrative task going on behind the scenes. On the second item, the powers and duties of the city council, I absolutely 100% believe that the city council needs to have the ability to do some level of oversight. We all know, maybe you don't all know, early on in the city, we had a city manager that had done some things that weren't entirely legal, and we put this provision in there to actually give us the ability to get in if there is certainly wrongdoing occurring, that the city council can at least request an investigation and start an investigation on a majority rule of the city council.
And it's a
at that point.
supermajority.
It's
It
a
takes
supermajority. It
five
takes five,
to
that's
start. It
correct.
doesn't take 2 or 3, it takes a supermajority to
Correct.
start an investigation.
Correct. And I still think city council needs to have the ability to do that level of oversight when needed.
The contingent appropriation is because the budget didn't have a contingency at one point, which is really crazy. So, I'm just saying, that got a little weird. We passed that, yeah, that was weird. But a $2,500 contingency probably, that's probably outdated to Fate's now $17 million budget. When I was on city council, the budget was $2.5 to $3 million. So it's a little bit different now than it was back then. So, okay, so it feels like everyone's kind of good with us kind of taking that, so.
Can I interject here?
Yes,
Well, you want to talk about, you've written some of these. I wrote
you wrote the whole thing.
So, I think we have a very shortened timeline. So if there are some of these things that we can talk over today, I think it would help the timeline, keeping us on schedule with only having really 2 meetings to discuss what's going on in sections 1 through 4 and 5 through 7. And I think there's a lot of questions regarding Article 5 and what your thoughts are around that. And for us to be able to address that in future meetings, if you can give us some thoughts about what you're, I mean, I get the premise, but I'm not exactly sure what your suggestion would be, because I don't feel like getting rid of it is something. I'm just trying to grasp the concept of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's some basics in the state law, I think, that have some requirements. So maybe taking a look at, I would take a look maybe at where we are compared to the state law, the current state of each of those pieces, to kind of see how far. So are we making it, that way you kind of know, like, are we making it a lot easier or a lot harder, or what the bar is for each of the different pieces? Just as we've, watching some trends.
Are you speaking specifically to the petitioners committee? Like,
Just the whole thing.
okay.
Just all the different pieces. So I'm just worried about the city being destabilized. We saw some stuff in Dallas recently with, of course, we don't have a billionaire in town that's funding different groups and calling, well, yeah, some of y'all may become the billionaire, but, and I've had cities with billionaires, it's weird. But, yeah, there's potentially the chance to have some undue influence, and then that could destabilize the city. So just as we move forward, we're getting in, we're becoming a bigger city. We'll probably be close to 30,000 by the end of the year. And we're on the trajectory to, in 20 years, hit 50-something, 55 or whatever. But, so we're going kind of slower. Our growth rate slowed down. That's on purpose. And so we're doing it very methodically. But as we go through, we'll just have this ability for people to make radical change. And I think you want the kind of the spirit of a lot of the things that we've done in the charter the last few years. We've got the 3-year terms. We've got the staggered approaches to how the councilmen are elected. And so we've got a situation where we've got a good, I think we've got a good government going, and we want to kind of continue that tradition, I think, without a stark change all of a sudden to different things. But that's just my general philosophy. So I have no particular sections that I would move this percentage to that percentage or so on. But maybe let the city attorney take a look and see how we compare against the state laws.
Thank you for addressing that. I was just trying to wrap my head around, because it's obviously, it has to be there. It's just, what are we trying to accomplish with revisiting and things like that? So I understand what you're saying now. Thank you.
And then when you look at the second meeting, 5, 6, and 7, I have a feeling that most of that meeting will be spent on referendums, because that seems to be the meat, not the organization of planning and zoning. I don't think we're going to spend a ton of time on Section 7 per se. We could. I think most of that discussion will be leaning towards that. I also believe that Section 3 would probably dictate the majority of our time. And our first section, when you get into council powers, and what city council is all about, more so than it would be, the city manager's duties and the city secretary's duties. Section 1 and Section 2 that just says we have a charter because we can. So I do think that it's kind of, I think Michael kind of foreshadowed what most of this discussion is going to be, is looking at Section 3 and looking at Section 5. That's usually what the Charter Review Committee does, is dive into those sections. But yeah, the one thing that I would like, if at all possible, Vicky and City Attorney, is between now and as quickly as we can we send out to the Charter Review Committee the state rules on the 3-year terms? Because once we go to 3-year terms, there's a lot of state laws that come with that, and I think it might help everyone focus in on what we want to do with council, because then the only other option would be to revert back to 2-year terms to do other things, which we could technically discuss. But I just think some sort of briefing or outline on what comes with the 3-year terms would be extremely helpful. Because when you read the City of Rockwall's charter, they have 2-year terms. So a lot of the rules they have on council, we either not allowed to have, or we already have them because we went to 3-year terms. Mm-hmm. So we don't necessarily have to dictate every single thing that's in state law. We could, but we don't have to. So I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, I'll be glad to do that. And as y'all are probably aware, because I think many of y'all served on the Charter Review Commission in the past, some of it's case law and some of it's AG opinions, and I won't send y'all 300 pages, but what I can do is send you the constitutional provisions and the state law provisions that deal with 3-year terms.
It will help us with our homework.
Of course.
And then with that, I want to go ahead and move to number 9, which becomes our discussion, which is discuss, consider, and take any necessary action regarding initial ideas about charter provisions that need review and recommend additional provisions, if any. I believe this is designed to be very open-ended, so I'm going to keep it open-ended. If anyone has, I guess at this point, anything that they think needs to be researched, that I think this would be a good time to bring some of that out. If you're not prepared, that's totally fine. We do have until January 9th to talk about Articles 1 through 4. I hope at this point everyone's read the charter. And so I also think that if anyone has any questions on some of the legalese of the charter, would be a good time if y'all have questions that y'all want to ask. I don't want to stifle any discussion. But I just want to give everyone a chance if they have something they want to ask, something that they think should be looked at. This is our we listen and we don't judge section. And we can put that out into the world, because the next time you talk about it, it will be, we will listen and we will judge. And we will discuss and we will debate. So I just didn't know. It's open-ended. I didn't write the agenda, so I'm just trying to keep it as open-ended as possible for that. I will let you know that I believe that McLennan Chisholm has basically borrowed our charter for their new charter that they're about to pass. So, so I think when they looked around at all the charters, they really kind of liked what we have going on. So I think that's really cool. They blew up my phone during that process, just asking me questions. And I just kept saying, talk to John Thatcher. Did they blow up your phone, Mr. Thatcher? You changed your phone. Well, good for you. No, they just asked a lot of questions about how we went from 2 to 3. And I said, I don't know. I showed up one day and John Thatcher had a map of this is how we're going to do it.
So can I make some
Yeah.
comments about?
For sure.
About elections and terms and the rationale why we did it. For anybody that runs for city council, you know, you get elected in May. And the first thing that happens is you get tossed into a budget,
Yes.
right? And you don't really, it takes an awful lot to get your mind wrapped around fund accounting and how the budget works and the restricted funds and the non-restricted funds and all that kind of stuff. And when we had 2-year terms originally, it takes a city council member probably a good year to get really familiar with what's happening from a local government perspective and how it all works and how the budget works and all that kind of stuff. And you get settled, you understand what's happening, and next thing you're running for your next term. And we were having high turnover rates within the elections, right? We would do 3 seats one year, 3 seats the next year, plus the mayor, right? And so we kept flip-flopping. And when we first were discussing it, we thought that it was easier to hold a better continuity from term to term to term as we went to 3-year terms when we're only changing over a third of the council every other year, or every third year, right? So the whole council, and then the mayor goes at one of the terms. And it seems to, it's instead of having a bunch of new people that can accidentally or on purpose make major changes to the budget during a budget cycle when you first start without really understanding what it is that you could be affecting inadvertently, I think it just provided a whole lot more stability. And I think that was the thought process.
100%.
When we were doing it, when we were first looking at this back in, 2016 or 2018, whenever we did the first review, is the reason why we went to those thirds. So before we go flipping back to 2-year terms, you know, you got to really consider the effect that could have on the operations of the city from that perspective, right? You can still, you know, new council members can still, you know, get changes in and make changes on how they want, but it does make it a little bit less haphazard when we do it, right? And like John said, that there's certainly some things that when you go to 3-year terms, there's certain things that you cannot do that other cities do, and I think that has produced a lot of stability in the way that we operate from a city council perspective and a budgeting perspective, because the budget is the biggest thing that city council members can get in and tweak and adjust. And if we don't do it right, we could end up with less DPS officers, or we could end up with bad code enforcement, and you know, and we struggle with all those kinds of things.
Well, with that, I can piggyback. So, you know, I remember that we had that conversation in 2015 when we met as a charter review commission. We were looking for more stability, and lots of cities handle that. There's a whole litany of different ways they address that. Some cities will propose moving their elections to November, so that you don't just throw new council members in the budget process from the get-go. Also, you know, it tries to, promotes trying to save money with elections. One of the things that I thought was interesting is, you know, we won't go to 3-year terms to try to promote consistency and just have, you know, more stability. But then I noticed that in our last charter election, we went to term limits. So, you know, council member can only serve 6 years at a time. And so that kind of is the balance or the check on that. And so, you know, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, and you know, So I don't think I'm in favor of saying we look at going back to two-year terms. I like the idea of not having runoff elections, and so that's one benefit of having two-year terms. But again, I'm not in favor of kind of going back to that.
And that is a really good provision to just think about, is that other cities don't have runoff provisions, but because we are three-year terms, we have to have runoffs. So you say, well, I don't want a council runoff. No, you have to. So those are certain things I think are important to kind of point out so that we don't spend a lot of time talking about things that don't do it. The other thing about the term limits is we did divide mayor and council. If you look at some of our neighboring cities, they put the whole city council as a whole into the term limit. So if you're a council person and then you go to mayor, you're still term limited back to when you were a council person. So in our charter, you can be a council person for 6 years and then you could be a mayor for 6 years. So, and that was done extremely intentionally at the time, is to not do that, because if you look, I don't want to pick on them, but our neighboring city, they've had a bunch of one-term mayors, because you spend a couple of years on city council and then you go to serve as mayor and then you're term limited off and you can't run for re-election as mayor. And then they just keep turning mayors over, and that's great, and no offense to Michael, but that gives the city manager a lot more power. Just saying, it does. If you want a balance, you have to have very confident people on the dais that can challenge the city to move it forward and to be a better voice of the people. So that's what it was designed to do. It was not designed because we want people to serve for 12 years. It was just designed that if someone ran for mayor, they have an opportunity to run for re-election if the people wanted to re-elect them as mayor.
And in regards to the term limits, I mean, one of the big things was before we did this charter change, not to pick on our forefathers, but we had people that were here for 22 years.
Yes, we did. Ran into one of those yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, and they worked with what they had to work with, but I think that term limits are important. And I like the structure that we came up with, because it seems to work well. And, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't run for city council, get on city council, serve 2 terms. You can go off for a year before you run again, but you're still, you know, you're still subject to being limited to what you can do, and may or may not get on the second time or third time if you do that.
Mr. Thatcher mentioned something that I don't know if it's can happen in the body of this charter. Commission is November elections. Is that something that the charter, I mean, I see that it calls for May, because I think it would be an enormous change to the city of Fate if thousands of people were electing the council and the mayor instead of several hundred. And people vote in November. I applaud what you did with the 3-year terms. I like how they're staggered. I like how someone could be a 2-term council member and then a 2-term mayor. I don't think anybody, I certainly don't want people that don't know what they're doing. A whole council of that would be quite challenging. Knowing that the resign to run is going to come up, the 3-year term came up in some of my research, but if I read the Texas Constitution, Article 16, very literally, it doesn't discuss city officials. It seems to be county officials and up that have to resign to run with their 3-year terms. And perhaps I'm misunderstanding that. We're blessed to have the city attorney. Because I'd hate to see the 3-year terms change, but I'd be very open to talking about November local elections.
Commissioner Kaiser, you are correct that Article 16 itself just talks about the county, but if you look at Article 11, Section 11A, it says that if a city has a term longer than 2 years, then you have to comply with Article 16.
Pros and cons. Well, I'm not going to go down the line and make anyone have to discuss anything. It's just not my style. But I am going to pause for a little bit in case anyone has anything they would like to add. But if not, please do your homework. Reach out to Vicki, reach out to the city attorney. Get as much stuff in the pipeline as possible so that we can have a good, lively discussion next time. We'll be respectful when we debate, but I expect good debate. As someone that's had to debate from the dais before, please bring a pen so that when you can write down the stuff you're going to say, because we will not be interrupting each other. So make good notes on what you're going to say. We will be polite, but I expect good, lively debate. Clear your calendar for January 9th, because we're going to be here until section 1 through 4 has been debated. We really don't have any other choice. We could call a special meeting, I guess, if we had to. I would rather not, but hey, I'm game. I love this stuff. I sit up here and talk about this all the time, but that's just me. So I'm going to purposely just have some awkward silence for a little bit so that everyone can get comfortable, and then we will adjourn, and we'll get back after it after the holidays.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
When we're proposing our ideas and sending them over to Vicki, the city attorney, and city manager, would you like us to have examples of other charters, you know, kind of where we're getting that research? Because my research has included me going into other city charters to try to make sure language is appropriate, things like that. Would you like that type of information, or do you just want a blanket, hey, let's talk about this?
So me mentioning it can be as vague as you want. It was just to have it as open for y'all so that people don't feel like they have to come forward with language. But obviously, as you know, because apparently you've worked on a lot of the drafting, if you have examples that you want to give to us, that is always helpful. So
Okay.
Feel free to be as specific as you care to be, but I didn't want anybody to say, well, I'm not going to email the city attorney because I don't know what the change should be.
Perfect.
You know.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that will not preclude you from bringing something up in a meeting. It will just make our discussion more fruitful, because if she pauses and says she doesn't know, we're just going to have to move on to something else. Right. We have to get a legal opinion before we really, truly try to flush something out, which I think is fair of all of us to ask that. But no, I like your question, because sometimes it's just an idea, and sometimes it's, why can't we do this? I read it in this city charter.
So, Mr. Chair, one other comment having to do with ethics. Ethics are specifically not addressed within the charter. We have an ordinance that is a past law with ethics. And one of the things that seems to be floating around out in the social media aspect is to have, if you're doing an ethics violation, to be removed from your seat. Know that from a state perspective, there's very limiting powers that a city council can do to boot somebody out of the seat, right? So if you get into ethics stuff, it would be easier to have it addressed within the ordinance versus trying to embed it in a charter. And I think that, you know, we'd have to be very, very careful on the kind of wording. I agree with the ethics. I agree with the statements that are being put out there. But to have somebody removed because they violate ethics, the city can't necessarily do that. The city council can't necessarily boot somebody. The only way, and we have provisions in the charter to do that with recall elections and all that kind of stuff. So there's a way to do that. But our removal process is very limited in scope and it has to get to do with felonies and that kind of stuff. qualification.
I will say, I have been doing several months of research on this, and there are many charters that have a lot of this outlined in it, and I will be bringing that forth and sending that over with that wording, so.
Thank you. Y'all said the charter was long now at 22 pages. Let's add some ethics of like 5 pages. Let's get this thing to 30. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, if you don't mind sending that out unsolicitedly of just what the 3-year terms and 2-year term provisions would be, that would be great. Everyone send your information in to the city secretary and the attorney. I hope everyone has a wonderful and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. You're gonna say something?
I was just about to say.
Okay.
I will send that out to everyone. I'll just include Michael's, myself, well, you'll have mine, but, and then also Jennifer's, and that way.
All right, perfect. And nothing is off the table, everything will be discussed. So will be discussed and voted up and down. Every single thing that every person up here has to say will be voted up or down. Nothing will be stifled. I just want y'all to know that. I hope y'all have a happy holidays. And with that, I will make a motion, we adjourn.
A second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. All right, we're adjourned. Thank y'all very much.